The first bark shattered the stillness of dawn like a stone through glass. Eli Turner, a man who had learned long ago that silence was the only wealth his land still offered, froze with his hand on the latch of his cabin door. The sound came again, sharper, more urgent, carrying through the mist that still clung to the low fields like a ragged quilt. His dog, Jasper, never barked without reason. For 5 years, the brindle mutt had been as steady as the ticking of a clock, guarding the yard, herding the few chickens they used to own, and curling at Eli's feet through nights when hunger gnawed louder than the wind. But this bark was different. It wasn't warning or play, it was a summons. Eli stepped outside, boots sinking into frost-bitten mud, breath rising in a plume of white. The farm stretched around him in tired silence, fields bare, the barn leaning with the weight of years. He should have been thinking about the letter on the kitchen table, the one with the red stamp screaming final notice across its top. 3 weeks, the bank had said. 3 weeks to pay what he could never hope to gather. But Jasper's barking cut through that worry, pulled him from the slow drowning of debt into something sharper, immediate. The sound came from the woods. The dark wall of pines at the edge of his land loomed like a secret held too long. Jasper's voice echoed from within, ragged and insistent. Eli's pulse quickened. That dog had never strayed far, never crossed into those trees without Eli at his side. Whatever called him there now was powerful enough to break 5 years of obedience. "Jasper!" Eli's voice cracked against the morning air. No reply, only the rhythm of barking, spaced like signals, each one tugging him deeper into unease. He grabbed his coat, pulled his hat low, and followed. The forest swallowed him quickly. Branches clawed at his sleeves, brittle under the weight of cold. Leaves from last season lay damp and matted underfoot, their rot perfuming the air with the scent of endings. Jasper's barks drew him forward, first to the left, then further uphill, always just beyond sight. Eli moved faster, lungs burning, until he broke into a small clearing he'd passed 100 times while hunting deer with his father years ago. There, in the center of the clearing, Jasper tore at the earth like a beast possessed. Clumps of soil flew behind him in frantic arcs. His growl rumbled low, vibrating in his chest as he dug deeper, ignoring Eli's approach entirely. Eli stopped short, heart hammering. The dog didn't look wild. He looked purposeful. Every strike of his paws hit the same spot. Every shovel of dirt thrown aside revealed more of something beneath the ground. This wasn't random. Jasper knew. "Easy, boy," Eli said softly, but his voice trembled. He crouched, reached out, and let his fingers skim the disturbed earth. The soil here was loose, softer than it should have been. His calloused hand sank deeper than expected, into dirt that had clearly been moved before. His mind leapt to stories told by lantern light when he was a child. Stories of men who buried things in the woods they never meant to be found. Of travelers who carried riches through hostile country and hid them under oak roots. Of neighbors who vanished without graves. Jasper paused, lifted his head, and fixed Eli with eyes that looked too knowing for a dog. The message in them was simple, urgent, and undeniable. Dig here. For a moment Eli felt as if the animal was more messenger than companion, sent to drag him toward something he was meant to face. He brushed away more soil, exposing the edge of something solid. His fingertips struck wood, then iron. The sound was faint but undeniable, a metallic scrape that didn't belong to forest floor. His breath caught, and suddenly the world narrowed to that single spot. The bank, the debt, the loneliness. None of it mattered compared to what might be buried beneath his knees. Then Jasper went silent. The forest fell into a hush so complete it roared in Eli's ears. No bird called, no wind stirred. Only the dog's steady panting and Eli's heart thudding against his ribs. In that silence another sound crept forward. Distant at first, then clearer. Hoofbeats. Slow, heavy, coming closer through the trees. Eli's stomach turned to ice. He pressed his palm flat against the ground, against the secret trying to surface, and felt the weight of choice pressing back. Whatever lay here was not just his discovery. Someone else was coming for it. And for the first time in a long, bitter while, Eli realized his life was about to change. Not in weeks, not in days, but in the next breath. Eli Turner had always thought of himself as a man who could outlast hardship. He had survived dry seasons that left the fields cracked like old leather, winters so lean that supper meant a heel of bread soaked in weak broth, and storms that split the barn roof clean through and drenched the grain he had borrowed money to buy. His body carried the story of that survival, calluses thick as bark on his hands, a permanent stoop from hauling too much weight alone, and eyes that scanned the horizon not for beauty, but for warning. Yet as he stood in his cabin that morning, staring at the letter on the table, he knew endurance had met its limit. The letter was a death sentence written in ink. Bold red letters screamed, "Final notice." The bank demanded payment in full within 3 weeks. Eli had barely managed the last installment by selling off the last of his cattle. Since then, he had sold the horse, the tools he no longer used, and even his mother's rocking chair, the one piece of furniture that still carried her scent of lavender and smoke. Each sale bought him a few more days of electricity, a little more grain, but nothing could stretch far enough to satisfy the ledger's merciless numbers. The farm his grandfather carved out of wilderness was slipping from his hands like sand through a fist. The walls of the cabin seemed to know. They leaned inward, listening, groaning with the weight of years and secrets. The porch sagged, boards warped by rain and time. Even the well, once the heart of the homestead, now wheezed when asked for water, coughing up more mud than clarity. Eli had stopped inviting neighbors to visit long ago. Pride shriveled when forced to entertain in a place that looked like surrender. Only Jasper remained steadfast. The brindle dog had wandered onto the farm 5 years earlier, a half-grown pup with ribs showing and eyes too sharp to be pitiful. Eli had set out Scraps on a whim, not expecting the animal to stay. But Jasper stayed, first sleeping under the porch, then inside by the stove, and eventually at the foot of Eli's bed. The dog worked without being asked, herding chickens, warning off coyotes, even once dragging a water bucket to the porch when Eli was too sick with fever to stand. They had become partners in survival, the kind of bond built not from affection alone but from shared hunger and long silence. It was that silence Jasper broke now, day after day, with his strange barking in the woods. At first, Eli ignored it. He had no time for mysteries. Every morning was a battle against numbers and necessity, chopping wood, patching leaks, scratching at the earth in hopes of coaxing a crop. But Jasper would not let it go. Each morning he raced to the same patch of forest, barking, digging, pausing only to look back with eyes that seemed to plead, "You need to see this." And each evening, Eli would drag him home, muttering curses, unwilling to believe that salvation might lie in the dirt, until the day came when ignoring the dog felt harder than following. That was why, when Jasper disappeared into the trees again with that urgent bark, Eli pulled on his coat and followed, not because he believed in miracles, not because he expected treasure, but because he was desperate enough to want distraction. Desperate men follow dogs into forests. Desperate men press their palms against loosened soil and wonder if maybe, just maybe, their ancestors left them more than debts and fading photographs. He thought of his grandfather then, a man carved from oak, who had built the cabin with his own hands and swore the land held more than it revealed. "Every acre's got a secret," the old man used to say, spitting tobacco into the dirt. "You just have to want to find it." Eli had laughed then. He wasn't laughing now. 3 weeks to lose everything. 3 weeks before the farm became another line in an auctioneer's chant. His father's grave was on this land, his mother's lilac bush, his childhood memories carved into the doorframe by a penknife. To lose it was to lose himself. He had tried everything a man could try: work, barter, begging at neighboring ranches. Nothing had worked. His pockets held exactly $18, his pantry held less. Jasper barked again outside, pulling Eli from his thoughts. The sound carried urgency, a command rather than a plea. Eli sighed, pushed away from the table, and reached for his coat. Maybe it was madness to follow. Maybe the dog had gone wild with some instinct Eli couldn't name. But madness was easier to bear than despair, and the woods at least offered the possibility of discovery. He stepped into the morning, boots crunching on frost. The sky stretched pale and thin, the sun still hesitant to commit to rising. Jasper was already a streak of motion, tail stiff, legs pumping, heading toward the tree line with a single-minded determination that made Eli's chest ache. He followed, each step heavier with both dread and hope. And that, my friends, is where we pause for a moment. Because before Eli learns what lies beneath that restless patch of earth, I want to ask something from you. If you're listening to this story, and it has drawn you in, if you feel the weight of Eli's poverty, the loyalty of his dog, and the mystery building under those trees, then take a second to subscribe to this channel. It helps more than you can imagine. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Are you sitting in a city apartment, on a quiet farm of your own, or halfway across the world with your phone in hand. These stories reach further when we share them together. Now, with that done, let's go back to the woods, where a poor farmer follows his dog into the unknown, and where the ground itself is about to change the course of his life forever. The forest had always been a place of quiet for Eli Turner, a boundary he respected more than explored. It marked the edge of his land, the line where pasture gave way to tangled shadows and roots as thick as ropes. He hunted rabbits there as a boy with his father, but he never trusted the trees after dusk. They seemed to lean closer in the dark, whispering secrets he wasn't meant to hear. Yet here he was, chasing the sound of Jasper's frantic barking deeper than he had gone in years. The dog darted ahead, a streak of brindled fur weaving through trunks slick with moss. Eli followed, boots crunching through damp leaves, the air cool and sharp in his lungs. Each step carried him further from the familiarity of fields and fences, further into a place where the ground rose uneven, littered with old stumps and half-buried stones. Jasper's barking grew louder, sharper, until it cracked through the forest like a gunshot. When Eli reached the clearing, his breath caught. Jasper was already digging furiously at the earth, paws throwing dirt in wide arcs, growls vibrating from his chest. The spot he had chosen looked no different than the rest of the forest floor, just a patch of soil scattered with leaves, framed by 3 poplars and a leaning hemlock. But the dog's intensity made Eli's skin prickle. This was not random. This was ritual. Each paw strike landed with purpose. Each bark carried insistence. "Jasper," Eli said, his voice low. "What are you after, boy?" The dog didn't answer, of course, but he paused long enough to glance back at Eli. His brown eyes gleamed with something Eli swore looked like urgency, almost desperation. Then Jasper went back to work, claws raking at the same spot, soil flying behind him in frantic sprays. Eli knelt beside him, brushed away a handful of loose dirt, and felt his fingers strike something solid. It wasn't stone. The texture was different, flat, smooth, with a coldness that seeped into his fingertips. He scraped more away and saw the faint line of iron edging wood. His breath tightened in his throat. Buried under years of fallen leaves and soil was something made by human hands. A chest? A door? He didn't know. All he knew was that Jasper had been right. Something waited here. He pressed his palm flat against the surface, felt the grit of rust under his skin. The soil was loose, disturbed at some point in the past. Not decades ago, recently. Maybe within the last few years. That realization cut through his excitement like ice. If someone had buried something here not long ago, someone might still be looking for it. Jasper whined softly, pawing at Eli's arm as if to say, "Hurry." Eli grabbed the small spade he had carried from the cabin and dug, every motion fueled by a strange mixture of dread and hope. The iron bands of the object emerged first, then a wide plank of wood stained dark with age but intact. He cleared enough to expose a corner of what looked like a lid. His heart raced. Treasure, tools, bones. It could be anything. Whatever it was, it had been hidden with care. Then the sound came. Hoofbeats, faint at first, then sharper, echoing through the trees. Eli froze, spade half buried in the soil, breath held tight. Jasper went silent, ears pricked, body stiff. The rhythm of horses carried across the clearing, slow but deliberate, like men who knew where they were going. Eli crouched low, heart hammering, eyes scanning the tree line. 2 riders appeared on the old logging path that cut across the northern boundary of his land. He recognized their shapes even at a distance. Lachlan men. Vern Lachlan owned the ranch to the north, though owned was too kind a word. He collected land the way a spider collected flies, snapping up failing farms and turning neighbors into tenants. Eli had seen his men once before at the co-op, paying cash for diesel, their eyes cold, their hands resting a little too easy near their belts. They weren't men who wasted time riding without purpose. The riders slowed, scanning the forest like hunters. One gestured toward the clearing, and for a breath, Eli thought they had seen him. But after a long pause, they turned their horses and rode on, hooves fading into the distance. Only when the silence returned did Eli realize he had been gripping the spade so hard his knuckles ached. Jasper whined again, tail low, nose pressed to the soil above the buried object. Eli swallowed. Someone else knew. Someone else was close. Maybe those men hadn't seen him today, but the tracks to this clearing would tell their own story. His dog had led him to something valuable enough to interest men like Vern Lachlan. That alone made it dangerous. He brushed soil back over the corner he had exposed, heart pounding, and rose to his feet. "Not today," he muttered. "Not without knowing what I'm up against." Jasper growled low as if protesting, but Eli snapped his fingers and the dog followed reluctantly. They left the clearing by a crooked route, moving quietly, every step heavy with the sense of eyes that might still be watching. By the time Eli reached the cabin again, the weight of his debts returned heavier than before. The final notice still sat on the table, a silent threat, $18 in his wallet, 3 weeks before the bank auctioned everything his family had built. His farm was a noose tightening by the day, and now, hidden beneath the forest floor, a secret waited, something Jasper had insisted he find, something worth enough for Lachlan's men to circle like vultures. Eli stared at the letter, then at the spade leaning by the door. He didn't believe in miracles, but he knew desperation when he felt it. Maybe the ground itself had decided to show him a way out, or maybe it was bait, a trap laid by hands far greedier than his. Either way, tomorrow he would return. He had no choice. As night fell and Jasper curled at his feet, Eli lay awake listening to the creak of the cabin, the whisper of wind through the pines, and the echo of hoofbeats that might return at any moment. Somewhere out there, under soil disturbed and waiting, a secret pulsed like a heartbeat. And Eli Turner, a man with nothing left to lose, had decided he would dig it up. Dawn broke gray and reluctant over the farm. Eli Turner had barely slept. The letter from the bank seemed to glare at him from the table all night, and the memory of hoofbeats in the forest kept circling his mind like wolves that refused to leave. Jasper lay curled at the foot of the bed, ears twitching in restless dreams, and each time the dog stirred, Eli's thoughts went back to the clearing, to the iron-banded lid half buried beneath loose earth. Whatever it wasn't ordinary. It wasn't random. And after years of scraping by on empty promises and worn-out soil, Eli couldn't ignore the chance that fate, strange and dangerous as it might be, was finally giving him something. By the time the first weak light touched the horizon, he had strapped on his boots, thrown a spade across his shoulder, and whistled for Jasper. The dog came instantly, tail stiff, eyes bright with a nervous energy that mirrored Eli's own. Together they walked across frost-hardened ground, their breath steaming in the cold air, past the sagging barn and the well that coughed mud, and into the tree line where the forest swallowed them whole. The path felt shorter this time, though every shadow seemed sharper, every rustle in the underbrush louder. When they reached the clearing, Eli knelt without hesitation, hands trembling as he pushed aside the moss and leaves covering the patch of disturbed earth. Jasper whined and pawed eagerly, digging beside him. Within minutes, the shape of the chest emerged more clearly than before. Heavy wood reinforced with rusted iron, a wide lid edged with a massive lock that had long since corroded. Eli brushed the dirt away and sat back on his heels. His heart pounded in his chest. This was no hunter's cache, no forgotten tool chest. It was larger, heavier, and unmistakably intentional. Whoever buried it had wanted it to last. His mind raced with possibilities. Gold, weapons, documents, maybe nothing but rocks meant to fool the curious. Still, the weight of it under his hands felt like promise. He pulled a crowbar from the satchel slung across his back and wedged it against the lock. Metal groaned. Jasper barked once, sharp and urgent as if to say hurry. Eli leaned harder, muscles burning, until the lock gave with a cracking sound that echoed too loud in the quiet woods. He froze, listening. Nothing but the rasp of his own breath in the dog's panting. Slowly, cautiously, he lifted the lid. Inside lay cloth-wrapped bundles, their edges stiff with age but preserved by oil and care. The first bundle he unwrapped revealed a scatter of coins. Gold, unmistakably, each one stamped with markings Eli didn't recognize. His breath caught. He had never held wealth like this, never even imagined it. Each coin was worth more than his monthly labor at 3 farms combined. He pulled back another cloth and found silver bars, dull but solid, stacked in careful rows. Beneath those lay a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked but intact. His hands shook as he opened the book. The handwriting inside was precise, old-fashioned, written in ink that had faded but not disappeared. Names, dates, places, notes about shipments, payments, and, most startling, a map sketched in ink, showing landmarks that looked eerily familiar. Eli traced a finger along the lines, realizing with a jolt that the map marked not only the clearing, but also a spring near his grandfather's old fence line. This wasn't just treasure, it was a record of something larger, a fortune hidden in pieces across the valley. Jasper barked suddenly, snapping Eli's focus back to the present. The dog's ears stood erect, his body stiff, eyes fixed on the tree line. Eli's stomach turned cold. He closed the lid quickly, brushing soil back over it with frantic hands, though it was far too late to erase the disturbance. Hoofbeats again, louder this time, and then a voice. "Morning," a man called, casual, almost friendly. "Beautiful day for digging." Eli stood slowly, every muscle taut as a rider emerged from the shadows. He knew the man instantly. Vern Lachlan. His silver hair caught the weak light, his weathered coat carried the smell of horses and smoke, and his hand rested far too comfortably near the revolver at his hip. His smile was polite, but his eyes cut sharp as knives. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here," Vern said, though his gaze swept over the disturbed soil with deliberate precision. "Your dog's been making quite the racket. Hard to ignore." Eli forced his voice steady. "This is my land. Been in my family for 3 generations. "Of course," Vern said with a chuckle as dry as autumn leaves. "Boundaries can be funny things, though. Surveys back then weren't as precise as they are now. A man could easily mistake where one property ends and another begins." Jasper growled, low and dangerous. Vern's smile flickered, then returned, thinner than before. "Smart dog you've got there. Knows when to be cautious." His hand tapped idly on the gun belt. "Hope he's just as smart about knowing when not to bite the wrong neighbor." Eli's jaw clenched. "I don't want trouble." "Neither do I," Vern replied. "But I hear you've had some. Bank letters piling up, land about to change hands. Shame, really. Unless," he let the word hang in the cold air, his eyes glinting, "unless you found a way to change your fortune." He took a step closer. Jasper barked once, loud and sharp, teeth bared. Vern's horse stamped nervously. The air between them thickened with threat. "Careful now," Vern said softly. "Wouldn't want a misunderstanding." Eli's heart pounded. He thought of the gold, the silver, the map hidden under the soil at his feet. He thought of his grandfather's words, of the debts pressing in, of the sheriff's office a full day's ride away. He was alone, and Vern knew it. Vern tipped his hat, his smile returning like a blade slipping back into its sheath. "Well, I'll let you get back to whatever you were doing. Just thought I'd introduce myself. I suspect we'll be seeing more of each other very soon." He turned his horse and rode slowly back into the trees, but his parting words lingered like smoke. "I know what you found, and I'll be back for it." When the forest swallowed him, Eli sank to his knees, breath shaking, hands pressed into the dirt as if he could hold the secret down. Jasper pressed against his side, growling low, eyes fixed on the direction Vern had gone. The message was clear. Whatever treasure lay beneath their feet was no longer just a chance at salvation. It was a claim others would kill for. The night after Vern's visit stretched long and merciless. Eli lay on his narrow bed with the journal pressed beneath his pillow as if the weight of the leather could anchor his thoughts. Jasper, restless, paced the floor, his nails clicking against the wood with every circuit. Outside, the forest creaked and whispered, each sound a possible hoofbeat, each shadow on the window a watching eye. Eli knew Vern's smile had not been farewell. It had been a promise. Men like Vern never left things unfinished. By dawn, Eli had resolved to act. The chest was too valuable, too obvious, to leave half buried in the clearing. He strapped a shovel and pickaxe to his back, slung the journal in his coat, and returned to the spot with Jasper trotting silently at his side. His boots crunched over frozen leaves as he avoided the main trail, cutting instead through undergrowth his father had once warned him never to cross. When they reached the clearing, Eli's stomach dropped. Someone had been there. The soil he had carefully brushed back was disturbed again, fresh boot prints pressed deep into the mud. Vern hadn't wasted time. Eli dug fast, desperation fueling each strike. Jasper stood guard, ears pricked, growl low and steady. Within minutes the chest was free enough to drag. He jammed the crowbar under the lid and pried it open once more. Gold coins gleamed in the weak light like embers caught in ash. Silver bars clinked as he shifted them aside. The sight would have stolen his breath if fear hadn't already taken it. Beneath the treasure he uncovered another layer, a small tin strongbox, sealed with a rusted clasp. He smashed it open with the pickaxe. Inside lay documents, property deeds, water rights, and letters marked with seals Eli vaguely recognized from the county courthouse. Whoever buried this had hidden not just wealth, but leverage, power carved into paper. Jasper barked suddenly, louder than before. Eli snapped his head up. From the tree line came the deliberate crunch of footsteps. Not hoofbeats this time. Boots. Several pairs. He had only moments. He scooped coins and deeds into his satchel, slammed the chest lid shut and kicked soil across it. Too late. Shadows spilled into the clearing. Vern Lachlan stepped forward, flanked by two hard-faced men with revolvers at their sides. Vern's smile was gone now, replaced by a cold calculation that made Eli's skin crawl. Well, well, Vern drawled. I was hoping you'd save me the trouble of digging. Looks like you've been busy. Eli straightened slowly, his hand brushing Jasper's head. This is my land, he said, voice tight. What's buried here is mine. Funny thing about ownership, Vern replied, his eyes flicking to the satchel. It changes depending on who's still standing. He nodded once, and the two men spread out, blocking the edges of the clearing. Eli's pulse hammered. There was nowhere to run. You've got two choices, Vern continued. Hand it over, and maybe I let you keep your dog and your cabin, or stand there with pride in your chest and a bullet in it. He shrugged. Makes no difference to me. Jasper growled, body tense, muscles coiled like springs. Eli's hand rested on the dog's back, steadying both of them. His mind raced. He couldn't outshoot them. He didn't even have a gun. He couldn't outrun them with their horses tied nearby. But he could outthink them, maybe. He had to. That's a generous offer, Eli said carefully, echoing the false courtesy Vern had used before. But I've never been good at sharing. Vern's lips thinned. Have it your way. The moment stretched taut as wire. Then chaos erupted. Jasper lunged, not at the men but at their horses tethered just beyond the clearing. The animals spooked instantly, rearing and kicking. One broke free, crashing through underbrush, dragging its reins like a whip. The second screamed, eyes rolling, nearly toppling its rider before bolting after the first. The sudden eruption of hooves and noise shattered the men's composure. One raised his gun, but his shot went wild as his horse dragged him sideways. The other stumbled, cursing as he tried to regain control. Eli seized the distraction. He swung the pickaxe, catching the nearest man across the arm. The gun clattered into the dirt. Jasper barked furiously, snapping at heels, forcing the men back. Eli grabbed the satchel tighter against his chest and ran, heart pounding, lungs burning. Vern shouted behind him, voice breaking with rage. You think you can run, Turner? I'll find you. I'll burn your cabin to the ground. Branches whipped Eli's face as he crashed through the forest. Jasper, a streak of motion at his side. He didn't stop until the cabin came into view, but instead of running inside, he veered toward the old root cellar dug into the hillside. Its heavy wooden door, hidden by vines, groaned as he yanked it open. He and Jasper slipped inside, the air damp and cool. Eli pressed his back against the door, clutching the satchel, chest heaving. They had escaped, for now. But Vern Lachlan was not the kind of man to accept humiliation. He would regroup, gather more men, and return with fire and iron. The treasure wasn't just a chance for Eli. It was a war waiting to be fought. And Eli, with nothing but his dog, his wits, and a satchel of stolen history, had just declared himself a soldier. Hours later, hoofbeats thundered again, this time accompanied by angry voices. Eli peered through a crack in the cellar door. Vern was back, and he had brought reinforcements. 5 men now, rifles slung across their shoulders. They circled the cabin like wolves, eyes sharp, weapons gleaming. Jasper pressed against Eli's leg, growling low, ready to spring. Eli's heart hammered, but his resolve hardened. He had run once. He wouldn't run again. The law was far but not unreachable. The deeds in his satchel carried weight. The journal even more. If he could get them to the courthouse, he might prove ownership, expose Vern's schemes, and secure protection. But to reach town, he had to survive the night. The clearing had shown him one truth. Vern would kill for what lay beneath the soil, and Eli would have to fight, or die, before he gave it up. The climax had arrived, written not in ink, but in blood and iron. And as Jasper growled into the darkness, Eli whispered the only prayer he knew, "Let me last one more day." Morning broke pale and cold over the valley. From the root cellar, Eli Turner watched the light stretch across his land, golden and fragile, as if the earth itself wanted to remind him what he was fighting for. Jasper lay curled at his feet, exhausted but alert, one ear cocked for any sound outside. The voices of Vern Lachlan's men had finally faded in the night, but Eli knew they would return. Greed never slept for long. He tightened the strap of the satchel that held the deeds, the journal, and a pouch of coins. Those papers were more than parchment. They were shields, proof that his land and its water rights belonged to the Turner family. Proof Vern couldn't bury no matter how many guns he brought. But paper alone wouldn't save him. He needed the law. By mid-morning, Eli saddled the old mule he had nearly sold months earlier and rode hard toward town. Jasper loped at his side, tongue lolling, eyes sharp. The journey took hours, each bend in the road a risk of ambush, each cloud of dust on the horizon a possible rider. But fortune, for once, seemed to ride with him. He reached the courthouse unchallenged. Sheriff Molly Boone, a stern woman with gray eyes and a badge that carried generations of authority, listened in silence as Eli spread the journal and deeds across her desk. She turned the brittle pages carefully, her brow furrowing deeper with every line. "These documents," she murmured, "they're older than the county itself, and if this seal is genuine, and it looks genuine, you're sitting on rights Vern Lachlan has been trying to steal for years." Her gaze rose, sharp as steel. "You willing to stand by this in court, Turner?" "I'm willing to stand by it anywhere," Eli said, his voice firm though his hands trembled. "I've got nothing left to lose but the truth." The sheriff nodded once. "Then let's bring him the kind of fight he doesn't expect." That evening, Eli returned to his cabin with Sheriff Boone and 2 deputies riding at his side. They waited in silence, rifles ready, while Jasper paced the porch. It didn't take long. As the sun dipped low, Vern arrived with 6 men, their faces hard, their weapons gleaming in the fading light. He dismounted with the casual arrogance of a man who believed the world still bent his way. "Turner," Vern shouted, "time to end this." The sheriff stepped out from the porch, her badge catching the last rays of sun. "Lachlan, you're under arrest for attempted theft, trespass, and conspiracy against a landowner." Vern froze, the color draining from his face. His men shifted uneasily, glancing at the deputies' rifles. One spat in the dirt, muttering, "Boss, this ain't what we signed up for." "You think a badge scares me?" Vern sneered, though his voice cracked at the edges. "This county runs on favors, not laws." "Not today," Sheriff Boone replied. "Today it runs on proof." She held up the journal. "And you just lost." The standoff stretched thin as wire. One of Vern's men twitched, reaching for his gun. A shot cracked the silence, fired clean and deliberate by a deputy. The man dropped his weapon with a cry, clutching his shoulder. That was enough. The rest raised their hands, the fire gone from their eyes. Vern cursed, but his words carried no weight now. He was shackled before the cabin he had promised to burn. For the first time in months, Eli felt his lungs fill without the heaviness of dread. He looked at Jasper, who wagged his tail once as if to say, "Told you so." Weeks later, the court upheld Eli's rights. The spring marked in the journal proved richer than anyone had guessed, its water flowing clear and strong even in drought. With the deed secured, Eli sold water to neighbors and the town alike, enough to pay off every debt and rebuild what years of struggle had broken. The cabin stood straighter under a new roof. The fields, once barren, greened again with life. And Jasper, the dog who had refused to ignore what lay beneath the soil, slept each night on a new rug by the fire, content and proud. Eli often walked to the clearing where it all began. The chest remained buried under a cover of earth and moss, a secret he no longer needed to unearth. He would stand there with his hand resting on Jasper's head, listening to the forest breathe, and think of how close he had come to losing everything. In those quiet moments, he realized something greater than gold had been uncovered. Faith. Faith that sometimes, when the world presses hardest, it's loyalty and courage that open the ground beneath your feet and show you the way forward. So, if this story has held you here until the end, remember Eli Turner and his dog Jasper. Remember that even in the darkest times, hope can be buried in plain sight, waiting for someone desperate enough or faithful enough to dig. And before you go, I ask you this. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next tale, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your words travel farther than you think, and they keep stories like this alive. Because as Eli learned, some discoveries change everything forever.